You know, I never thought I'd make enemies in my own neighborhood, especially not the kind that make you question your sanity every time you check your mail. But here we are. Let me tell you about the worst Karen I've ever met. And trust me, I've met a few. But this one? She took nosiness, bossiness, and full-blown power tripping to a level that would make a parking meter officer jealous. Picture this. The president of our HOA, yes, president, like she got elected to rule over more than lawns and leaf blowers, broke into my mailbox. Then she faked a bee allergy on purpose, just so she could create some dramatic scene and shift the blame to me when she got caught. Her cover story? She said she was performing a mailbox inspection. What is this? Federal espionage disguised as suburban upkeep. What she didn't know was that I had the entire show. Bee allergy, fake drama, suspicious behavior, all on camera. And not just my camera. Security feeds from other neighbors, too. She'd made a fool of herself in front of the entire block, and no clue. But before we get to that glorious part, let's wind it back a little. I want to share how it all began, the slow, sneaky spiral into HOA madness. But first, while you're here listening, drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. My name is Kyle Cruz, and I've always believed that a man's home is his castle. Not the kind with towers, a drawbridge, or fire-breathing lizards. Though seriously, how cool would that be? I'm talking about a regular house. A place where you're free to wear 2 different socks, let the lawn grow a little wild, or leave a lawn chair on the porch without a 17-point citation appearing in your mailbox. Our neighborhood used to feel like that. Peaceful, friendly. The kind of place where people waved when they passed, barbecued in their driveways, and swapped holiday cookie tins. The lawns were green, the mailboxes all matched, and nobody cared if your sprinkler head leaned a little left. Then came Karen Johnson. Put plainly, Karen turned our slice of suburbia into a gated madhouse. Once she was elected president of the Homeowners Association, everything changed. You could practically track her rise to power to the sound of her little white golf cart squeaking down the road. That sound? It became the official soundtrack to my blood pressure. Karen wasn't just a fan of the rules. She lived for them, and if they didn't exist, she created them. Out of thin air, like a magician who hated joy. Every week brought a new regulation about garbage bins, hedge length, string lights, wind chimes, or even lawn gnomes. And every new rule somehow seemed aimed at whoever looked at her sideways that week. Now, while I have a habit of reacting first and thinking second, Heather, my wife, is the one who actually keeps our lives functioning. She's wise, calm, and organized in ways I can't even pretend to match. She's the steady center of our home. I joke that she runs the house like an aircraft carrier. Everything in order, every piece accounted for. She controls everything from security cameras to meal planning, and she's a trained first aid instructor to boot. Which, let me tell you, helps when I make the brilliant decision to fix a sink without turning off the water. Now this whole mess, the war between us and Karen, started without warning. It began with a letter, just a little envelope. One Tuesday, after a long day at work, I came home and spotted it taped to our door. Not just our door, every door on the block had one. Matching white envelopes stamped with a snazzy HOA logo, which featured an overly cheerful sun shining over a perfectly trimmed bush. Inside, a short, snarky message announcing a brand new bylaw. Article 7, Section 4B, Mailbox Hygiene and Security Inspections. Effective immediately. The letter claimed there had been a spike in mail theft, news to all of us, and that the HOA now had authority to perform unannounced inspections of all resident mailboxes. Reason: to ensure cleanliness, pest control, and to prevent storage of unauthorized materials. Let me repeat that. Mailboxes. Random inspections. By the HOA. The letter ended with a sentence that looked cheerful but felt more like a warning from a dystopian overlord. A clean mailbox is a happy mailbox. I barely got to the end before I felt my blood start to boil. Heather stood next to me, reading silently over my shoulder. I felt her body go still, like a storm cloud forming. "They can't do this," she said flatly. "That's a federal offense," I answered, scrunching the paper like it had insulted my dog. I looked out across the street. And what do you know? Karen's living room blinds shifted. Just a flutter. She was watching. This wasn't about mailboxes. This was about control. This was Karen Johnson, a woman so tightly wound, she probably irons her shoelaces, trying to convince us she had the right to paw through other people's mail, to violate federal law and call it neighborhood maintenance. She'd crossed a line. I flattened the letter on the kitchen counter, my fist unclenching. Heather, of course, had already opened her laptop and was hammering away like Sherlock Holmes on a keyboard. 5 minutes in, she leaned back, her face set. Nothing. There is nothing in the HOA agreements that gives them authority over mailboxes, she said. Federal law was clear. Mailboxes are federal property. Even though we technically own the physical box, the contents, and the act of using it, is governed entirely by the United States Postal Service. What's more, ours was a shared cluster box, a federally installed unit, meaning the HOA had zero authority to touch it. She just made this up, I muttered, though even I could tell it wasn't really a question. Heather nodded. She's testing to see who pushes back, who will follow, who won't. I turned toward the window again. Old Mr. Henderson, a kind man who'd lived here longer than anyone, read his letter. His hands trembled slightly as he peeled the tape off and went inside, shoulders slumped in sad surrender. Next door, the Garcias. Young couple, just moved in. Boxes still lined their garage. They looked anxious just reading the envelope, burying that panic that you get when you think you've made a very expensive mistake. This was Karen's game. Fear. Keep people confused. Overwhelm them. Turn the block into sheep, but we're not sheep, so what now? I asked. What I wanted to do was storm across the street and demand an explanation, maybe with a bullhorn and a flamethrower. But that's what she wanted. She wanted a scene. She wanted a reaction. She'd catch it on her cell phone, cut, slice, edit, and 2 hours later, the whole block would get an email titled, "Aggressive Neighbor Threatens Your Beloved President." Heather? She smiled a different kind of smile, the kind that meant someone was about to lose by a landslide. "We don't get angry," she said calmly. "We get smarter. We get organized." That's when I knew. Karen had no clue what she'd just awakened. "She wants to inspect our mailbox?" Heather repeated softly. "Fine. Let's give her something to inspect." She closed her laptop and stood up with a look that usually precedes color-coded binders and long talks about receipts. Within an hour, we were walking the dog without the dog, just circling the neighborhood with purpose. Doors cracked open like we were selling forbidden secrets. Everyone had questions. Uneasy whispers followed us. "She can't open mail, right?" Mr. Henderson asked. "Only if the flag means, 'Send help,'" I whispered back. Then, as if summoned by gossip, Karen's golf cart rolled past, lights blinking like a discount police cruiser. "Evening, citizens," she chirped, pen already drawn like a sword. Heather gave her a laser-precise smile. "Evening, private citizen," she said. Karen's pen twitched midair. "Cute cart," I added. "Does it come with a warrant?" Her jaw clenched like she'd just bitten a lemon. She rolled past in silence. Heather gave my hand a quick squeeze. "Evidence over ego," she said softly. We weren't going to rant. We were going to document every move she made, every bylaw she broke. It was time to build a case. Because Karen Johnson had just declared war. On our privacy, our sanity, and, most ironically of all, the United States Postal Service. She thought printing something on letterhead made her queen. But our house isn't just a house. It's our castle, and now, I was ready to defend the Royal Mail. This time, she picked the wrong family, the wrong house, and most definitely the wrong mailbox. Then there were the Millers, an older couple who had lived in the neighborhood for 20 years. Mrs. Miller loved to garden. Her prized possession was a cheerful 4F tall garden gnome she called Gus. Gus had been in her flower bed since they moved in. He had a pointy red hat, a long white beard, and a fishing pole. He was, by all accounts, a happy gnome, until Karen decided Gus was a violation. Lawn ornaments are limited to a height of 18 in, the notice read. Furthermore, all ornaments must be of a naturalistic theme. Gnomes are mythological creatures and are not permitted. The Millers were heartbroken. They pleaded with the board. They explained that Gus was a gift from their grandchildren. Karen was unmoved. She said if the gnome wasn't gone in 48 hours, they would be fined $50 a day. They moved Gus into their garage, and the flower bed looked empty and sad. Every time I walked past their house, I saw that bare patch of dirt where Gus used to be, and it made me angry. It was a tiny thing, a stupid gnome, but it was their tiny stupid gnome. It was their property. And Karen had taken a little piece of their happiness for no reason other than because she could. We saw it happen. We shook our heads, but we didn't speak up. Karen paid $25 bounties for snitch pics. Smiles died, doors shut. Heather and I had managed to stay off her radar for the most part. We followed the ridiculous rules. We brought in our trash cans on time. We used the approved shade of beige for our trim. We were careful. We were quiet. But this mailbox rule was different. It wasn't about the color of our house or a gnome on our lawn. It was an invasion. It was a demand for access to our private lives. Looking at the scared faces of our neighbors, at the sterile conformity settling over our streets, I realized we had a choice. We could be like everyone else, keep our heads down, let her win, and hope she moved on to another target. Or we could be the ones who finally said no. We had watched her bully our friends and neighbors for too long. We had stayed silent while she turned our home into a place of fear. Now she was at our door and there was nowhere left to retreat. Fear was her weapon. Yes, but every bully has a weakness, and Heather and I were determined to find Karen's. This wasn't just about our mailbox anymore. It was about taking our neighborhood back. My first plan was simple, maybe too simple. I figured if Karen was going to be snooping around the mailboxes, I should be snooping around the mailboxes too. The mail kiosk for our section of the street sits under a single flickering streetlight at the end of the neighborhood. It's a big metal block of 16 individual locked boxes. It's a boring, functional piece off federal equipment. Or it was until it became the front line in the war against Karen Johnson. I told Heather I was going to do some late-night gardening. She knew exactly what I meant. She just nodded and said, "Be smart, Kyle. Don't engage unless you have to. Just watch." So for 3 nights in a row, I sat in my car, parked just far enough away to have a clear view, but not so close as to be obvious. I drank lukewarm coffee from a thermos and felt like a character in a bad detective movie. For 2 nights, nothing happened. The world slept. A cat slinked across the street. The sprinklers came on at their scheduled time. I was starting to think I was just being paranoid. Then came night 3. I clicked my radio. Raven to Nest, eyes on neighborhood. "Copy, Raven," Heather said. "Nest advises you don't do anything dumb. Define dumb. Anything that starts with you narrating." I grinned in the dark and slid the thermos into the cup holder. Sprinklers hissed on across the way, a cheap fog machine for our little spy movie. A cat leapt the curb, gave me a judgy look, and sauntered off. Probably on Karen's payroll. It was just after 11. The street was dark and silent. Her golf cart didn't make a sound as it rolled up to the curb, its lights off. Karen got out. She wasn't carrying her clipboard, which was somehow more menacing. She was dressed in dark clothes, moving with a purpose that made the hair on my arm stand up. She had a set of keys in her hand. She looked left, then right. I slouched down in my seat, my heart starting to pound. This was it. She wasn't just checking one mailbox. She used a key on the master panel at the side of the kiosk. The entire front panel of 16 doors swung open like a cabinet. My jaw dropped. She had a master key. A postal key. How in the world did she get a postal key? She pulled out a small flashlight and started peering into each box one by one. She wasn't just inspecting for hygiene. She was looking at the mail. She pulled a letter out of the Garcia's box, shined her light on the return address, and put it back. She was taking inventory. She was spying on the entire street. I had seen enough. My promise to Heather to just watch went out the window. I got out of my car and started walking toward her, my footsteps loud in the quiet night. "Looking for something, Karen?" I said, my voice calm, but my hands were clenched into fists. She jumped, dropping her flashlight. It rolled on the pavement, its beam cutting a wild circle in the dark. She spun around, her face a mask of shock, then anger. "Kyle, you're lurking in the shadows. You're spying on me." The hypocrisy was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. "I'm not the one with a master key to the federal mailboxes," I said, pointing at the open panel. "Where did you get that?" Her eyes narrowed. "The old postman gave it to the HOA years ago for emergencies." "It's perfectly legal." "There's no emergency here, Karen," I shot back. "And I'm pretty sure there's no such thing as an HOA postal key. You're committing a federal crime right now." That's when she started to get smart in her own twisted way. She pulled out her phone. "You're harassing me," she said, her voice suddenly shaky and high-pitched. She was performing. "You're threatening an HOA official in the course of her duties." She hit record. The little red light blinked at me. "All I see," I said, keeping my hands open and visible, "is you illegally going through your neighbor's mail." I took a step forward to get a better look at the key in her hand. "That was my mistake." AC moved. She stumbled backward theatrically, letting out a little yelp. "He's coming at me." She shrieked into her phone. At that exact moment, a car pulled up. It was Barry, one of Karen's bored cronies. A doughy man who followed her around like a puppy. He jumped out of his car. "Karen, are you okay?" "I saw him get out of his car and stalk you." It was a setup. She must have called him as soon as she saw me. He ran over, positioning himself between us. "You need to back off, Cruz," he puffed, trying to look tough. "You can't threaten the president." "I didn't threaten anyone," I said, exasperated. I caught her breaking the law. Karen was now sobbing into her phone, recording a dramatic, one-sided account of how I had ambushed and terrified her. Barry, trying to be a hero, gave me a shove. It wasn't a hard shove, but I was off balance. I stumbled back, tripping over the curb. My elbow hit the pavement hard. Heather's voice boomed from our porch cam. "Step back, this is recorded." Barry froze. Barry puffed harder. "You can't film us." "You walked into the world's biggest camera," I said, nodding at the streetlight, the doorbells and our porch cam's blinking LED. "Smile." Karen angled her phone. He threatened me with facts. I raised both hands. "Careful, they're loaded." Barry glanced at the open master panel, then at my hands, then at the porch cam. His courage leaked out like a slow tire. A sharp pain shot up my arm. Karen stopped her fake crying long enough to get a perfect shot of me on the ground. "He fell," she narrated. "He attacked us and then he fell." I got up, my elbow screaming in protest and a fresh scrape on my chin. I looked at Karen with her phone held high like a trophy. I looked at Barry puffing out his chest. They had their story. They had their witness. They had their video. And I had a throbbing elbow, a ripped shirt, and the sickening realization that I had played right into their hands. She had won this round completely. She had a witness and a video. I had a bruised ego and a really bad but very clear idea forming in my head about how this was going to end. I came home that night with a ripped sleeve and a new ugly scrape on my chin. Heather took one look at me and her face tightened. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just guided me to the kitchen, sat me down, and started cleaning the cut with an antiseptic wipe. The sting of the wipe was nothing compared to the sting of my own stupidity. "She set me up," I said, wincing as she put a bandage on my chin. Barry was there. "They recorded the whole thing, but only after she provoked me." Heather finished her work and looked me straight in the eye. Her expression wasn't angry. It was focused. "Okay," she said quietly. "Her move. Now it's ours." She pulled out her laptop. "Getting into a shoving match in a parking lot is not how we win this, Kyle. We win this by being smarter. We win this by using the law she thinks she's above." For the next hour, we didn't talk. We researched. Heather dug into the specifics of the United States Postal Inspection Service, the law enforcement arm of the post office. They were the ones who investigated mail theft, mail fraud, and most importantly, tampering with mailboxes. We found story after story of people facing serious prison time for far less than what Karen had just done. The next morning, Heather made the call. I sat beside her, listening on speakerphone, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands. After navigating a phone tree that seemed designed by a madman, a calm, professional voice came on the line. "Postal Inspector Ramos, how can I help you?" Heather, in her clear, steady voice, laid out the whole story. She started with the letter about the mailbox inspections. She detailed Karen's history of HOA overreach. Then she described what I had witnessed last night. The master key, the searching through mail, the stage confrontation. She was careful with her words, sticking only to the facts we could prove. She didn't say, "I think Karen is a power-hungry tyrant." She said the HOA president used a key to open a master panel and inspect the contents of 16 federally protected mailboxes. Inspector Ramos listened patiently, not interrupting once. When she was done, there was a long pause. I could hear the faint sound of him typing in the background. "Ma'am," he finally said, his voice weary, like he'd heard 1,000 stories just like this one. "Unfortunately, an accusation, even a credible one, isn't enough for me to get a warrant. Your husband was the only witness to the actual mail tampering. Her witness will say he saw something else. It becomes a he said, she said situation, and her video will only show the end of the confrontation." My heart sank. So that was it. She was going to get away with it. "So there's nothing you can do?" I asked, unable to keep the frustration out of my voice. "I didn't say that," Ramos replied, and for the first time I heard a harder edge in his tone. I said, "I can't act yet. What I need is incontrovertible evidence of her attempting to remove or inspect the contents of a mailbox. Ideally, video evidence. If you could provide me with that, a video showing her specifically opening your mailbox and attempting to interfere with your mail, then we have a case. A very, very strong case." Heather and I looked at each other. A spark of an idea passed between us. "Inspector," Heather said carefully. "Hypothetically, what if we knew she was going to try to inspect our mailbox again? And what if we had a camera set up to record it?" There was another pause. "The law is simple," he said, his voice precise. "You can film from your property and capture what's visible from there. If you document her willfully opening your assigned door without permission, that's strong evidence. Any evidence you legally obtain would be reviewed." I would find that very interesting. He never said yes. He never said go for it, but he told us exactly what he needed. He gave us the blueprint. He explained that we couldn't booby-trap the mailbox in any way that could cause harm. That would be a crime on our part. But we could observe. We could document. We could create a situation where Karen's own actions would be her undoing. After he hung up, Heather turned to me, a slow smile spreading across her face. The same smile she got when she solved a difficult crossword puzzle. "He can't help us officially," she said, "but he just told us how to help him." The anger and frustration I'd felt since the night before began to fade, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. Karen wanted to play games. She wanted to use the rules and recordings and witnesses to her advantage. Fine, we could play that game too. Only we weren't going to use her flimsy made-up HOA rules. We were going to use federal law, and we were going to build a trap so perfect, so legal, and so undeniable that she would walk into it herself. He couldn't officially approve our plan, but he told us exactly what kind of evidence would be very interesting to his office. And we were about to produce something very, very interesting indeed. The plan was born in the quiet of our kitchen, sketched out on a notepad by Heather, while I paced back and forth, the wheels in my head finally turning in a useful direction. We couldn't use anything that could actually hurt her. No paint bombs, no glitter, nothing that could be twisted into an assault. Inspector Ramos had been clear on that. The trap had to be psychological. It had to be something that would make her react. Something that would prove she had opened the box and gone through its contents, all while being perfectly harmless. And that's when I looked out the window at my hobby. In the back corner of our yard, behind the rose bushes, were my beehives. I'm a hobbyist beekeeper. It's a calming, fascinating pastime. I love watching the intricate society of the hive. The way they all work together for a common goal. Bees are predictable. They're organized. They're everything Karen Johnson wasn't. And they were going to be our secret weapon. "Not real bees," Heather said immediately, reading my mind. "Absolutely not. We can't put people in danger, even Karen. Not real stinging bees," I agreed. "But the idea of bees, that's what we need." So we got to work building our decoy. I had a small empty observation hive in the garage. It was a wooden box about the size of a shoebox with a plexiglass side. It was perfect. It was light, harmless, but it looked official and a little intimidating. Heather, ever the tech genius, took it to the next level. She bought a tiny Bluetooth speaker, the kind you can stick on a shower wall, and loaded it with a high-quality audio file of bees buzzing. It was surprisingly realistic. We secured the speaker inside the box. Then came the master stroke. It took a handful of my bees, drones, the males from one of my hives. Drones don't have stingers. They look big and loud, but they can't sting ever. We put about a dozen inside with a bit of sugar water to keep them happy. To add a bit of theatrical flair, we rigged a simple spring-loaded flap on the top of the box. When the lid was opened, the flap would pop up, releasing a small puff of yellow chalk dust to simulate pollen and allowing the drones to fly out. The effect would be startling, but the result would be nothing more than a little dust and some confused, stingless bees. The most crucial piece of the puzzle was the warning. Heather knew that for our plan to be legally sound, we had to show that Karen was explicitly warned and chose to proceed anyway. We couldn't be accused of entrapment, so she designed and printed a professional-look warning label. She used a bright yellow background with bold black letters. It read, "Warning live bees, apiary transport box. Do not open. Do not disturb. Property of Cruz.family apiary." She laminated it to make it durable and official. We didn't place this label on the outside of the box. That would be too easy for Karen to claim she didn't see it. Instead, we taped it firmly to the inside of our mailbox door. We used removable tape, nor residue, no markings left behind. To get to the bee box, she would have to open the mailbox, revealing the bright yellow warning in her face. She would have to physically reach past the sign to get to the decoy. There would be no way for her to claim she wasn't warned. It was a brilliant move, creating a clear line of intent. Opening the mailbox door could be an accident. Reaching past a giant warning sign to open a box inside. That's a choice. The final preparation was the surveillance. Heather's expertise with our home security system was invaluable. We had a camera pointed at our front yard, but the angle to the mail kiosk was poor. So we set up a new dedicated system. She mounted a small high-definition camera inside the garage, peering out a small window with a perfect unobstructed view of the mailboxes. She ran the feed directly to her laptop. For audio, she placed a sensitive long-range microphone in the thick bushes near the kiosk. It was weatherproof and looked like a rock. Finally, the piece de resistance. A tiny pinhole camera hidden in the kiosk trim beside our slot, legal outside the box, framing anyone who opens our door. Everything was recorded to a secure hard drive with timestamps automatically synced to the atomic clock. Heather tested every angle, every feed, every microphone. It was a professional-grade surveillance operation, all focused on one 16-slot tin can at the end of our street. That afternoon, under the guise of collecting our mail, I placed the decoy box inside. It fit snugly at the back. I checked the trim camera angle. I closed the door, making sure the warning label was flat and visible on the inside. Everything was ready. The trap was set. All we needed was for the queen bee of the HOA to take the bait. The waiting was the hardest part. For 2 days, nothing happened. The mailman came and went, placing letters in front of our little wooden box without a second glance. We watched the camera feed compulsively. We saw neighbors get their mail. We saw kids ride their bikes past. We saw Karen drive by in her golf cart several times, slowing down each time she passed the kiosk, her head craned, obviously curious. She was biding her time, waiting for the right moment. Heather and I went about our days acting as normal as we could. But underneath the tension was a tightly coiled spring. Every time a car drove down the street, we would both freeze looking at the monitor. Then on the third day at dusk, it happened. The sky was turning a bruised purple and orange. Streetlights were just starting to flicker on. It was that in-between time when shadows get long and things are hard to see. Perfect for someone who doesn't want to be seen. Karen's golf cart rolled silently to the curb. She got out and looked around. The street was empty. She didn't have her clipboard. She didn't have Barry. She was alone. This was it. Heather and I were in the living room, the laptop open on the coffee table. We were watching 3 video feeds at once. The garage cam, the pinhole cam beside our slot, and the audio feed from the microphone rack. Heather had her hand on the mouse, ready to zoom in. My heart was a drum against my ribs. We watched as Karen approached the mail kiosk. She fumbled with her keys, her eyes darting left and right. She was nervous. Good. She skipped the master panel and went straight to our door. A copied key. Thalok clicked. We later learned the builder kept a management duplicate. Karen held onto it. The small metal door swung open. On the laptop, the feed from the pinhole camera beside our slot flared to life. We had a perfect crystal-clear close-up view of Karen Johnson's face, illuminated by the fading light. Her eyes widened as she saw the bright yellow warning label plastered on the inside of the door she'd just opened. We could read her lips as she silently mouthed the words, "Warning! Live bees!" The audio from Thalok mic picked up her sharp intake of breath. She knew she was warned. She could have closed the door right then, walked away, and we would have had nothing but a video of her opening a mailbox. But she couldn't help herself. The need to know, the need to be in control was too strong. She reached in, her hand moving past the warning sign, her fingers wrapped around the wooden decoy box. The pinhole camera captured every detail. She pulled the box forward toward the light, her face a mixture of suspicion and entitlement. She examined it for a moment. Then with a decisive tug, she lifted the lid. She'd read the warning. Drone's only speaker noise. No stingers, no harm, only proof. The effect was instantaneous and I have to admit, deeply satisfying. The tiny speaker inside roared to life with the sound of 1,000 angry bees. The spring-loaded flap shot open, releasing the puff of yellow chalk dust right into her face, and the dozen big, fuzzy, harmless drone bees came bumbling out into the evening air, confused but loud. Karen shrieked. It was a full-throated horror movie scream. She dropped the box, stumbling backward, flailing her arms wildly as if fighting off a swarm of invisible demons. One of the drone bees, probably attracted to the floral scent of her hairspray, bumped gently against her cheek before flying off into the twilight. She didn't get stung. She couldn't have been stung. But that didn't matter. The performance had begun. She threw herself to the ground, clutching her throat with both hands. "Help!" she gasped, her voice suddenly raspy and weak. "I can't breathe. The bees, they're killing me!" She rolled on the pristine lawn next to the sidewalk, kicking her feet, her eyes squeezed shut. It was the worst piece of acting I had ever seen. But as lights started flicking on in the houses around us, I knew that didn't matter. She didn't scream because of a sting. She screamed because our camera's little red light, the one on the garage camera she must have finally noticed, was on. "Do I swat or do I salute?" Mr. Garcia asked Bat halfway up. "Neither," Heather said. "Give her space," Nate whispered to his kids. "See, overacting is not a career plan." Barry waved his arms at the crowd. "Everyone back. She's be toxic." "That's not a thing," I said. Karen peeked with own eye to make sure the audience was watching, then clutched her throat again. The drone bee bumped her sleeve like a tired Roomba and toddled away. The scene descended into chaos. Her screams had brought neighbors out of their houses, their faces etched with alarm. The Garcas from next door camera running. Neighbor Nate appeared on his porch, his kids hiding behind his legs. Barry, her clipboard shadow, must have had a sixth sense for drama because his car screeched around the corner moments later. He leaped out and ran to her side. "Karen, what happened?" he yelled, kneeling beside her writhing form. "It was Cruz," she gasped, pointing a trembling finger at our house. He booby-trapped the mailbox. "Anaphylactic shock. Call 911. While Barry fumbled with his phone, Heather was already on the line with the dispatcher. I stood by her side, watching the scene unfold from our front window. Heather's voice was a perfect mask of calm concern. "Yes, my neighbor appears to be having some kind of medical episode near the community mailboxes on Elm Street," she said. Her tone level and precise. She is conscious and breathing. She is claiming it was a bee sting. She didn't editorialize. She didn't accuse. She just reported the facts as they were happening. This was crucial. Our calm, rational response was being recorded on a 911 call, a stark contrast to the hysteria playing out on the lawn. The sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. A small crowd had gathered, keeping a safe distance, whispering amongst themselves. I could see the confusion and fear on their faces. They saw Karen on the ground gasping for air. They heard her accuse me. From their perspective, it looked bad. It looked like I had done something monstrous. I felt a surge of anger, but Heather put a calming hand on my arm. "Let it play out," she whispered. "Every second of this is being recorded. Her words, her actions, everything." The ambulance and a police car arrived at the same time, their flashing lights painting the street in strobing blues and reds. 2 EMTs, a man and a woman, jumped out of the ambulance with a medical bag and a stretcher. They were all business, their faces professionally blank as they pushed through the small crowd. The police officer, a young guy who looked like he was barely out of his teens, followed them, his hand resting near his sidearm. The EMTs knelt beside Karen. "Ma'am, can you tell us what happened?" the female EMT asked, her voice calm and authoritative. "Bees!" Karen wheezed. "Hundreds of them. I'm deathly allergic. My throat, it's closing up." Heather said, "We have an EpiPen. Do you want it?" The EMT nodded. "Offer noted." "No," Karen snapped. I watched, fascinated, as the male EMT clipped a pulse oximeter onto her finger and wrapped a blood pressure cuff around her arm. He looked at the readings. I saw his eyebrows raise just a fraction of an inch. "Ma'am, your oxygen saturation is at 99% and your blood pressure is 120/80, he said, his voice flat. "Your vitals are perfectly normal," he glanced at her skin. "I don't see any sting marks either." Karen's eyes flew open. This was not part of the plan. "But I can't breathe," she insisted, adding a few pathetic-sounding coughs for effect. "The venom. I need an EpiPen." The female EMT opened their medical bag. "We have an EpiPen right here, ma'am. Are you authorizing us to administer it?" This was the moment, the point of no return. An EpiPen injects epinephrine into your system. It's a powerful drug. If you don't need it, it can cause a dangerously rapid heartbeat, high blood pressure, and severe anxiety. It's not something you take lightly. Karen stared at the EpiPen in the EMT's hand. Her mind was clearly racing. The EMTs knew her vitals were normal. If she took the shot and her heart rate went through the roof, they would know she was faking. Her bluff was being called by medical science. "No," she stammered, pushing the EMT's hand away. "No, I think it might be passing. Just get me to the hospital." The EMTs exchanged a look. It was a quick, subtle glance, but it spoke volumes. They'd seen this show before. The male EMT made a note on his chart. "Patient refusing epinephrine," he said loud enough for the police officer to hear. They helped her onto the stretcher, her gasping suddenly much less dramatic. As they were about to load her into the ambulance, she seemed to remember her role as the victim. She lifted her head and pointed directly at me. As I now stood on my own front porch, "Arrest him!" she shouted, her voice miraculously strong again. "He did this!" "He tried to murder me. He packed that mailbox with killer bees." The young police officer turned and looked at me. He walked up my driveway, his face unreadable. He looked from her, strapped to the stretcher, but still yelling to me, standing calmly with my wife. He looked at the small wooden box lying on the grass where a single confused drone bee was crawling on top of it. He sighed, a long, tired sound. "Sir," he said to me, "I think you and I need to have a talk." I knew this was far from over, but as the ambulance doors closed on Karen's furious face, I allowed myself a small private smile. The officer took our statements and said, "Don't discuss this with neighbors." For a night, we waited for ACNOC. The HOA emergency meeting was called for 2 nights later. The email sent by Barry in his new capacity as acting president was dripping with melodrama. It spoke of an unprecedented and violent assault on President Johnson and the need for the community to take swift and decisive action. The meeting was held in the clubhouse, a small, stuffy room with uncomfortable folding chairs and bad fluorescent lighting. It was packed. The entire neighborhood was there, drawn by the scent of scandal. Karen was there, of course, sitting at the head table next to Barry. She had a neck brace on, a completely unnecessary 4-show neck brace. She looked pale and fragile, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. It was a masterclass in performative victimhood. The meeting started with Karen telling her story. She spoke in a soft, trembling voice, recounting the harrowing tale of how she was simply performing her HOA duties, inspecting the mailboxes for safety when she was ambushed by my vicious, weaponized insects. She claimed the doctors at the hospital said she was lucky to be alive. She painted me as a monster, a menace to the community who'd to be stopped. When she finished, the room was silent, a mix of shock and sympathy on the faces of my neighbors. She had them until we pressed play. Then Barry stood up. "The board proposes an immediate and permanent eviction of the Cruz family," he announced, "along with the maximum allowable fines for endangering the community." Then it was our turn. Heather stood up. She wasn't carrying a box of tissues. She was carrying her laptop and a small projector. While I set up the projector and aimed it at the blank wall behind the board members, Heather walked to the front of the room. She was calm, composed, and looked every bit the professional she was. "Good evening, Sheboygan," her voice clear and steady, cutting through the tense atmosphere. "My name is Heather Cruz, my husband Kyle, and I would like to present a slightly different version of events." "Point of order," Barry blurted. "No videos allowed. Point of reality," Heather replied, cuing the projector. "This is our reality." From the back, Mrs. Miller cupped her hands. "Play the one where she reads the sign." "There are multiple," I said helpfully. A few chuckles bubbled. Karen's neck brace creaked as she straightened. Heather clicked to the first frame. "Tonight we'll use small words, big pictures, and timestamps." She clicked a key on her laptop and the projector whirred to life. The first image on the wall was a high-resolution photo of the bogus HOA letter about mailbox inspections. "This is the letter that started all of this," Heather said. "A letter announcing a new rule that is indirect violation of United States federal law, specifically U.S. Code 18, Section 1705, which makes it a crime to tamper with mailboxes or their contents." A murmur went through the crowd. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Next, Heather played the video from our garage camera. The footage was clear. It showed Karen alone using a master key to access the cluster panel. "No emergency, no authority. This is unauthorized access," Heather narrated. She then switched to the pinhole camera footage. The screen was filled with Karen's face, her eyes wide as she read the warning label. The audio was crystal clear. "Here," Heather said, pausing the video with the warning label perfectly framed. "You can see Ms. Johnson reading a clear, unambiguous warning. It says, 'Warning. Live bees. Do not open.'" She let that sink in for a moment before continuing the video. The crowd watched me as Karen reached past the sign, opened the box, and then began her theatrical screaming and falling. Heather let the whole performance play out. The flailing, the gasping, the pointing. Then she put up a news slide. It was a scanned copy of the official EMT report which we had requested. "This is the report from the paramedics who treated Ms. Johnson at the scene," Heather said, using a laser pointer to highlight a section. "It notes her blood oxygen level was 99%. Her blood pressure was normal, her breathing was, and I quote, unobstructed. It also notes right here that she refused an EpiPen when it was offered." Karen's face had gone from pale to a blotchy red. The neck brace suddenly looked ridiculous. Finally, Heather put up one last slide. It was a close-up photo of one of the bees that had come out of the box. One I had found later sleeping on a leaf. "This is one of the killer bees from the box," she said. "It's a male drone bee. As any beekeeper or biologist can tell you, male drone bees do not have stingers. They are physically incapable of stinging anyone. The entire incident, from the illegal entry to the faked allergic reaction, was a fabrication." She turned off the projector. The room was utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop. The faces that had been filled with sympathy for Karen were now turning to look at her with confusion and then dawning anger. Heather hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't called Karen names or slung insults. She just presented the cold, hard, documented facts, and the facts were closing in on Karen like a swarm. The board members stared speechless, first at the now blank wall, then at Karen, whose carefully constructed narrative had just been systematically and completely dismantled in front of the entire neighborhood. The silence in the clubhouse was thick and heavy. No one knew what to say. Karen sat frozen at the head table, her face a mask of disbelief. Barry was sputtering, trying to form a sentence, but no words came out. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. The videos, the official report, it was all there. Heather had laid the trap, and I had baited it. But it was Karen's own lies that had sealed her fate. I thought that would be the end of it. The board would have to drop their ridiculous eviction notice, and we would all go home. But I underestimated the courage of a man who was tired of being pushed around. Slowly, neighbor Nate stood up. The man whose kids' chalk drawings had been labeled graffiti. He was a quiet guy, an accountant, not one to make a scene. His hands were trembling, but he held up his phone. I have something to add," he said, his voice shaky but clear. All eyes turned to him. He took a deep breath. After the incident, Karen sent me a few text messages. She was bragging. He swiped his thumb across his phone screen and started to read. "Did you see the drama tonight?" he read, his voice growing stronger with each word. "That'll teach the Cruzes to defy the board. I have everyone believing he tried to kill me. The best part is, I'm not even allergic to bees. I'll just say I am, and they'll be run out of the neighborhood by the end of the week." A collective gasp went through the room. It was one thing to see the video evidence of her lies, but to hear her own words, her own gleeful confession was something else entirely. It was the nail in the coffin. Nate looked directly at Karen. "I'm tired of being afraid," he said. "I'm tired of my kids not being able to draw on their own driveway because it disrupts your aesthetic uniformity." His words broke the spell. It was like a dam breaking. Mrs. Miller, the owner of the banished garden gnome, stood up. "And I want Gus back," she declared, her voice ringing with newfound confidence. "He's been in the garage for 2 years because you decided you don't like mythological creatures." Suddenly, people were talking all at once. A dozen different voices rose up, sharing their own stories of Karen's petty tyranny. The fines for trash cans, the warnings about the wrong color of flowers, the threats over holiday decorations being left up a day too long. The fear that had kept everyone silent for so long was gone, replaced by a wave of righteous anger. It was a full-blown rebellion. People were on their feet, shouting, pointing at Karen and the stunned board members. Karen's kingdom, built on whispers and fear, was collapsing in a roar of angry voices. She looked around the room, ears wide with panic. These people, her subjects, the ones who had cowed and complied for years, were turning on her. Her power was an illusion, and it was evaporating before her very eyes. Through the commotion, a figure at the back of the room stood up. He was wearing a simple jacket and had a calm, authoritative air about him. It was Postal Inspector Ramos. We had called him earlier and told him about the meeting. We didn't know if he would come. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, his arms crossed, watching the proceedings. He made eye contact with me and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He had seen and heard everything he needed. The mutiny was in full swing. Neighbors were pulling out their phones, showing each other threatening emails from Karen, comparing notes on unjust fines. The board was in disarray. Barry's face had gone white as a sheet. He was backing away from Karen as if she were contagious. Her reign was over. It had ended not with a bang, but with a text message from a woman who was too arrogant to cover her own tracks. The chaos in the clubhouse resolved itself into a kind of focused democratic fury. With Inspector Ramos standing as a silent official witness at the back of the room, the residents took charge. Neighbor Nate, emboldened by his stand, made a motion from the floor. I moved for an immediate vote of no confidence in President Karen Johnson and the entire current board. Someone else seconded the motion. Barry, trying to regain some semblance of control, stammered, "You can't do that. It's not on the agenda. We're making it the agenda." Mrs. Miller shouted back and a cheer went up. The vote was a landslide, a near-unanimous show of hands. Karen was officially removed from her position, her face crumbling as her imaginary crown was publicly stripped away. The other board members, seeing the writing on the wall, resigned on the spot, mumbling apologies as they scurried out of the room. It was a complete and total rout. After the vote, Inspector Ramos calmly made his way to the front. He approached Karen, who was still sitting at the table, utterly defeated. He didn't raise his voice. He simply placed a folded piece of paper on the table in front of her. "Karen Johnson," he said, his voice carrying easily through the now quiet room. "This is an official citation from the United States Postal Inspection Service. You are cited for unlawful mail tampering. False report is under review. You will be hearing from our legal department." The consequences for Karen were swift and severe. Beyond the public humiliation, she faced hefty federal fines. The master key was confiscated. The Postal Service traced it to an off-books loan by a retired postmaster who was forced into retirement. Faced with legal bills and the open hostility of the entire neighborhood, she and her husband put their house on the market a month later and moved away. We never saw her again. In the aftermath, a new HOA board was elected. Neighbor Nate, to his own surprise, was voted in as the new president. His first official act was to draft a new bylaw, which he called the Gus and Sidewalk Chalk Act. which explicitly protected lawn ornaments and children's temporary art. It passed unanimously. The old oppressive rulebook was systematically dismantled and replaced with common-sense guidelines that focused on safety and property values, not aesthetic tyranny. The sense of community, so long dormant, came roaring back to life. People started talking to each other again. The block parties returned. As for the bees, myco-conspirators, they got a happy ending too. While I loved having them, I knew their presence would always be a reminder of the conflict. A local organic farm was looking to expand its pollination program, so we arranged to have my hives safely and professionally relocated there. It was a bittersweet moment watching them go. But I knew they were going to a place where they could thrive and do a lot of good. The weekend after the hives were moved, something amazing happened. A handful of neighbors showed up at our door with shovels and bags of mulch. Mrs. Miller had an idea. The thorny, ugly, HOA-approved bushes around the mail kiosk were an eyes sore. "We should plant something for the bees," she said. "A thank you." So, we spent the whole Saturday as a neighborhood tearing out those hateful bushes. We replaced them with a beautiful pollinator garden full of lavender, bee balm, and cone flowers. Kids and adults worked side by side, digging and planting, laughing. As I stood back watching my neighbors, my friends turn a symbol of oppression into a patch of life and color, I felt a profound sense of peace. We had faced a bully. We had stood our ground. We had refused to live in fear. We learned that a community is only as strong as the people willing to stand up for it. Justice, as it turns out, can be pretty sweet, and sometimes it even comes with flowers. Note to Karen, the mail is federal. The flowers are local,